We live in a world that never shuts up. Notifications, status updates, group chats, constant commentary, everybody's always talking, posting, explaining. If you're not sharing every detail of your life, the world makes you feel like you're falling behind. But here's the twist. In this non-stop noise, one of the most powerful tools in human interaction has quietly been forgotten: strategic silence. While everyone else is racing to announce their plans, reveal their strategies, and broadcast their every thought, the most effective players in any arena know something different. They know when to shut up. They know silence isn't weakness, it's a weapon. Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine political thinker from the 1500s, understood this better than almost anyone. Most people remember him for The Prince, a book full of sharp, often ruthless advice about ruling. But some of his most important lessons weren't about what you should say. They were about what you should leave unsaid. Machiavelli once wrote that the vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances. He recognized that words create appearances, shadows on the wall. Silence, on the other hand, preserves reality. In today's culture of oversharing, those who master silence don't just protect their position, they gain an edge. They win while others are still busy talking about how they're going to win. The hidden cost of talking too much. In Machiavelli's time, one loose sentence could get you exiled, imprisoned, or worse. Words carried a real price tag. Today, the consequences may not be as extreme, but unnecessary speech still creates problems that silence naturally avoids. Every word you put out into the world has a cost. Let's break that down. First, speech creates commitments. The moment you announce your plans, you tie yourself to them. If you change direction later, you look inconsistent or worse, dishonest. But if you keep quiet, you leave yourself free to adapt. No explanations, no apologies, you just move. Silence gives you flexibility. Second, speech exposes your thinking process. The more you explain yourself, the more you reveal about how your mind works. And that's dangerous information in the wrong hands. Others can use your words to predict your moves, manipulate your decisions, or counter your strategies. Machiavelli once said, the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. In the same way, the first method for estimating someone's strategic capacity is to listen to how much they unnecessarily reveal. Third, and this is a big one, compulsive speech kills mystique. Machiavelli famously declared, "It is far safer to be feared than loved." And fear, or respect, requires distance. Distance requires mystery. The moment you explain every thought, justify every decision, or overshare every detail, you become ordinary. And ordinary people rarely command respect. Think about the workplace. The colleague who chimes in on every topic during a meeting, no matter how little they actually know, loses authority over time. Or on social media, the friend who shares every detail of their day eventually becomes predictable. In negotiations, the person who nervously fills silence with concessions hands away their leverage, and leaders who respond to every criticism only make their critics look more important while diminishing their own stature. Machiavelli would look at our modern obsession with transparency and authenticity and laugh. He'd see it as strategic malpractice, a voluntary surrender of power, giving away information for free without getting anything valuable back. The 3 types of strategic silence. Here's the thing, Machiavellian silence isn't just saying nothing. It's a deliberate tool, and it shows up in 3 different forms, depending on what you need to achieve. Let's walk through them. 1. Information. Gathering silence. Machiavelli once wrote, "The wise man does at once what the fool does finally." The fool speaks first, showing their hand. The wise man stays quiet, waits, and learns. This type of silence flips the normal dynamic of communication. While everyone else is spilling their thoughts, intentions, and weaknesses, you're sitting there, collecting valuable intelligence without giving away anything in return. It creates an asymmetry. You know more about them than they know about you. This principle shows up everywhere. In negotiations, the rule of thumb is that whoever speaks first loses. In relationships, the person who listens more deeply almost always understands the dynamics better. In competition, the ones who announce their strategies before acting usually underperform compared to those who execute quietly. Information gathering silence is about patience. Let the other side talk themselves into exposing everything you need to know before you decide how to act. 2. Authority building silence. Machiavelli also reminded us that power is partly about perception, and perception, oddly enough, can be strengthened by saying less. A prince must imitate both the fox and the lion, he wrote. The lion relies on strength, the fox relies on cunning, and part of the fox's cunning is knowing when to keep quiet. Authority-building silence works because people instinctively fill in the blanks when you don't give them all the information. Those assumptions, more often than not, work in your favor. Think about leaders. The junior executive over-explains, desperate to prove themselves. The CEO makes a single, sharp statement and moves on. The insecure person justifies every decision. The secure person speaks briefly and lets their words stand. By holding back, you make your words carry more weight. You project confidence instead of insecurity. You create the aura that your time and your voice are too valuable to waste. 3. Ambiguity, preserving silence. Finally, there's the silence of ambiguity. Machiavelli's most famous line is that it's safer to be feared than loved if you can't be both. But the deeper lesson isn't just about fear, it's about maintaining flexibility by keeping your position unclear. Ambiguity, preserving silence, lets other people project their own assumptions onto you. You give them space to see what they want to see. You maintain deniability by never stating your position too clearly. Politicians use this all the time. They craft statements vague enough that different audiences interpret them differently. Negotiators use it too, keeping positions open until the last possible moment so they don't narrow the deal too early. Leaders use it by laying out a vision but avoiding unnecessary detail, so they can adjust tactics later without contradicting themselves. And this isn't deception, it's strategy, because once you lock yourself into a specific declaration, you lose flexibility. Ambiguity keeps you free. The psychology of silence. So why does silence work so well? Beyond the practical side, it has psychological power that speech just can't match. First, silence creates projection. When you leave gaps, people instinctively fill them. They project their own hopes, fears, and assumptions onto your silence. In that moment, they reveal more about themselves than you ever could by asking direct questions. That's why interrogators often rely on silence, not endless questioning. The subject eventually can't stand it and spills everything. Second, silence establishes dominance. The person who talks the most, or the longest, often looks like they're trying to earn approval. The person who speaks less implicitly takes the position of judge, not supplicant. Machiavelli would call this the logic of power. It's safer to be feared than loved. You may not be loved for being quiet, but you'll often be respected. Third, silence creates mystique. As Machiavelli put it, men judge more by the eye than by the hand. What people can't fully see, they tend to imagine as stronger, greater, more formidable than it really is. The moment you explain everything about yourself, your motives, your doubts, your plans, you lose that aura. But if you keep parts of yourself hidden, people often overestimate you. That's the real power of silence. It magnifies your influence simply by making people wonder. The trap of transparency. In modern culture, we've been trained to see transparency as an automatic virtue. Be authentic, Share your truth. Put everything out in the open. That sounds nice in theory, but Machiavelli would have considered it a strategic disaster. Why? Because the more you reveal, the more you trap yourself. Machiavelli once wrote, "The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present." What he meant was simple. Locking yourself into past declarations often kills your present opportunities. That's what the transparency craze does. It binds you to things you might later regret. It demands that you give away information today that others can use against you tomorrow. And worst of all, it convinces you this self-sabotage is a virtue. Now let's be clear, this isn't about lying. Machiavelli wasn't saying deceive everyone. His real insight was about selective disclosure. Say only what advances your goals, withhold what doesn't. Don't give away value for free. He once wrote, "Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception." Updated for our time, that's never give away through oversharing what could be protected by silence. The modern transparency trap. We see this trap everywhere. In the workplace, people feel pressure to share every work in progress, even when it's not ready. They blurt out half-formed ideas in meetings. They reveal their negotiating positions before they've even learned what the other side actually wants. In relationships, people make premature emotional confessions, confess past mistakes that only create unnecessary baggage, or overshare detailed plans that may change anyway. On social media, the compulsion to be authentic leads people to narrate every detail of their lives, making them predictable and, ironically, less authentic. Machiavelli would call all of this malpractice. It's not authenticity, it's weakness. It's a surrender of power disguised as virtue. And what happens to the transparent person? They become predictable, manipulable, ordinary. Three qualities that kill influence. Speech versus strategy. This is where the real distinction lies. For most people today, speaking is about self-expression, but for Machiavellian thinkers, speaking is about strategy. You don't speak just to say what you feel, you speak to move the game forward. You reveal when revealing gives you leverage, you withhold when withholding preserves your advantage. The goal isn't constant communication, the goal is effectiveness. That's why Machiavelli's insights feel so radical today. He reminds us that silence isn't awkwardness, it's discipline. And in a culture that rewards compulsive speech, discipline looks like power. Practical application, the discipline of silence. So how do we take all this from theory to practice? How do we apply Machiavelli's approach to silence in everyday life? Here are 3 disciplines you can start building right now. 1. Practice. Information asymmetry. Before you reveal your position on anything important, negotiations, workplace decisions, even personal matters, make sure you understand the other side first. Ask questions instead of rushing to make statements. Pay attention to what people don't say, not just what they do say. Machiavelli put it in his own way. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. The fox's cunning starts with silence. Gather information. Don't reveal. In negotiations, this discipline is priceless. The side that knows more about the other's real needs and constraints almost always comes out on top. In the workplace, understanding your colleagues' motivations before declaring your own stance helps you avoid unnecessary conflict and win allies. In relationships, listening first shows you where the other person stands before you make commitments you might regret. Information asymmetry isn't about tricking people, it's about giving yourself the space to move wisely instead of rashly. 2. Cultivate strategic ambiguity. This doesn't mean you should be deliberately confusing. It means you avoid unnecessary specificity until it's truly required. Machiavelli once counseled, "A prince should therefore be very slow to believe and to act, nor should he himself show fear." What he's describing is the patience to keep options open. In leadership, this might look like articulating a strong vision where the team is headed without locking in every detail of the journey. That way, if circumstances change, you can adapt without looking inconsistent. In personal relationships, it might mean expressing commitment to shared goals, love, growth, partnership, without chaining yourself to rigid timelines or promises that life might disrupt. In competitive situations, it means holding your strategies close while your rivals announce theirs, letting you adjust on the fly. Strategic ambiguity is about flexibility. It's about refusing to be boxed in too early. 3, embrace silence as a position of strength. Most people are terrified of silence. They rush to fill it because it feels uncomfortable. But if you can train yourself to sit with silence, to own it, you turn that discomfort into an advantage. Think about negotiations. You state your terms, then stop talking. Most people can't take the tension. They start rambling, adding qualifiers, or even offering concessions just to break the silence. That's when you win. Think about conflicts. Instead of jumping in defensively, you let the other side finish without. Let the silence hang and only respond once. That patience often makes your words land harder. Think about leadership. Deliver decisions clearly and concisely without padding them with justifications. Trust the decision to speak for itself. Silence after a statement communicates more authority than endless explanation ever could. Training yourself to embrace silence is like building a muscle. At first it feels awkward, but over time it becomes a natural position of power. The strategic whisper. Here's the key point. Machiavellian silence doesn't mean you never speak. It means you speak with purpose. You reveal some things, but only the things that serve your goals. You stay quiet on the rest. That contrast between what is revealed and what remains hidden is what makes your words powerful. Machiavelli wrote, "The vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances, and the world consists chiefly of the vulgar." Translation: most people are fooled by surface-level noise. If you can resist the urge to broadcast everything, your selective words will stand out. Your voice will carry more weight because you don't waste it. Your positions will attract more attention because you reveal them strategically, and your influence will grow because you exercise it with discipline. That's the art of the strategic whisper, not saying nothing but saying less, so that when you do speak, it matters. A rare discipline in a loud world. Here's the irony. In a culture where everyone is shouting, the one who stays disciplined with silence almost always stands apart. It takes patience to listen before speaking. It takes restraint to withhold when disclosure feels tempting. And it takes awareness to recognize when silence will get you further than words. These aren't easy skills, but they're rare skills. And in strategy, what's rare is valuable. That's why those who master silence so often prevail. They're not caught in the trap of compulsive expression. They're not giving away their position for free. They're not ordinary. They're calculating. They're patient. They're powerful. And because of that, they win the game that everyone else is still busy talking about. Silence as the ultimate leverage. Machiavelli's genius wasn't in writing about abstract theory. It was in his ability to show how strategy plays out in real life. He wasn't interested in morality for its own sake, he was interested in results. And when it comes to results, silence is one of the most underrated forms of leverage. Think about leverage as weight against resistance. When you stay quiet while others overexpose themselves, you hold the balance of power. When you keep your plans close while others reveal theirs, you maintain initiative. When you speak selectively while others speak compulsively, you make every word land with more force. In this way, silence isn't absence, it's presence. It's not weakness, it's pressure. Like gravity, it doesn't announce itself, but everything bends around it. Machiavelli put it simply. The wise man does at once what the fool does at last. The fool eventually learns the cost of speaking too soon. The wise one understands from the beginning that silence is leverage. The three modern arenas of silence. To bring this down to earth, let's look at three arenas where Machiavellian silence is especially powerful today: business, relationships, and leadership. 1. In business, negotiations and influence. In business, information is currency, and silence preserves your capital. Consider negotiations. The salesperson who talks too much often reveals their bottom line before the customer even asks. The manager who over-explains a decision signals insecurity instead of authority. The employee who nervously fills every silence in a meeting ends up sounding less confident than they actually are. Contrast that with the professional who knows how to pause, to wait, to let the other side speak first. That person often leaves the table with better terms, not because they had more power, but because they had more patience. Machiavelli's fox and lion both show up here. The fox uses silence to gather intelligence. The lion uses silence to project authority. Together they form a style of communication that commands respect and secures advantage. 2. In relationships, emotional discipline. Relationships thrive on communication, but not on compulsion. One of the biggest mistakes people make is equating constant verbal output with intimacy. The truth. Sometimes, silence builds more connection than endless chatter. When you listen fully, you show respect. When you avoid impulsive confessions, you protect trust. When you choose your words carefully, you make them matter more. Machiavelli wasn't writing about romance, but his principles apply. He warned that men are more apt to be moved by things present than by things past. Over-disclosing past mistakes or oversharing every fear doesn't strengthen bonds, it often destabilizes them. Silence in the right moments is an act of strength that preserves the relationship instead of weakening it. 3. In leadership. Authority through restraint. Leadership magnifies the power of silence more than almost any other context. The insecure leader explains every detail, justifies every choice, responds to every criticism. The strong leader communicates vision, gives direction, and leaves space. Their silence signals confidence. Their restraint magnifies authority. Machiavelli emphasized appearances. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see but few can feel. Leaders are judged by how they appear, not just by what they do. A leader who constantly talks appears anxious. A leader who can remain quiet under pressure appears in control. That's why some of the greatest leaders in history, whether generals, CEOs, or political figures, understood that silence was part of their arsenal. They knew that what they didn't say could be just as influential as what they did. Building the habit of silence. Of course, knowing the value of silence and practicing it are two different things. In a culture addicted to noise, silence takes discipline. But like any skill, it can be trained. Here are 3 practical exercises to strengthen your silence muscle. The pause. Rule. Before answering any question or responding in conversation, pause for 3 seconds. This short delay trains you to avoid impulsive speech, while making you appear more thoughtful and intentional. The listening ratio. Aim to listen at least twice as much as you speak in group settings. This builds information asymmetry, you learn more than you reveal, and positions you as someone who doesn't waste words. The strategic omission. In your next important conversation, deliberately hold back one piece of information you would normally share. See how it changes the dynamic. Often, the other side will reveal more to fill the gap. Over time, these small practices compound. You stop reacting, you start controlling, and eventually silence becomes not just a tactic, but a natural way of holding power. Silence and fear. Let's return to Machiavelli's most famous line, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." At first that sounds harsh, but in the context of silence it makes sense. Fear isn't about cruelty, it's about respect. And respect often comes from mystery. The one who talks too much is rarely feared. They become familiar, predictable, ordinary. The one who withholds, who keeps others guessing, who reveals selectively, that person generates a subtle fear. Not the fear of violence, but the fear of the unknown. And in power dynamics, the unknown is one of the strongest forces of all. That's why silence isn't just a communication tool, it's a psychological one. It creates space for imagination, projection, even intimidation. And those forces often achieve more than words ever could. The silence that speaks loudest. In the end, Machiavelli's wisdom about silence isn't about withdrawal. It's about control. It's about replacing the reflex to speak with the discipline to act. When you master silence, you gain 3 priceless advantages. You learn more than others reveal, you project more authority than you explain, you preserve more flexibility than you commit. Most people will never develop this skill. They'll keep talking, oversharing, and broadcasting their weakness in real time. But those who do develop it, those who master the silence, become rare. And in strategy, what's rare is valuable. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago, and it's just as true today. The world is loud, the crowd is vulgar, but those who resist the noise, those who hold their silence like a blade, win in ways that others can't even see until it's too late. So the next time you're tempted to fill the space with words, remember, silence is not emptiness, it's leverage, it's strategy, it's power. And in a world where everyone else is still busy talking, silence is how you win, is